The cardboard boxes stacked in the hallway were not mine, but every single item packed inside them belonged to my childhood. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom I had slept in since I was 6 years old, watching a stranger hang her summer dresses in my closet. My mother did not look up from the bed where she was carefully folding floral duvet covers. She simply smoothed the fabric with the back of her hand, her posture rigid, and delivered the sentence that shattered 22 years of quiet endurance: "She needs it more than you." There was no negotiation in her voice, no preliminary conversation, and not a single hint of apology. My younger brother, Julian, was leaning against the doorframe behind me, his arms crossed over his chest, sporting that familiar, self-satisfied smirk he had perfected over a lifetime of unearned preference. Beside him stood Chloe, his fiancée of 3 months, holding a brass table lamp that used to sit on my late father's desk. I had driven for hours from campus for midterm break, expecting to unpack my duffel bag, study for my final microeconomics exam, and eat a quiet meal. Instead, I found my locks changed, my personal belongings crammed into trash bags resting on the garage floor, and my sacred space handed over like a complimentary hotel upgrade. "You're at university 5 days a week anyway," my mother added, her tone carrying that sharp, dismissive edge that always signaled the end of any discussion in our house. "Chloe is moving out of her apartment to save money for the wedding. Julian needs his space, and as a family, we make sacrifices for the people who are building a real future." She thought I was going to cry. Julian certainly expected it. He had his phone casually tilted in his hand, waiting to record the moment I lost my temper so he could broadcast my supposed immaturity to the rest of the extended family. They expected the familiar routine: me raising my voice, my mother playing the heartbroken martyr, and Julian stepping in as the protective son. They did not know about the manila folder sitting at the bottom of my locked leather briefcase in the trunk of my car. They did not know about the notary seal stamped in crisp blue ink on thick parchment paper, or the legal deed that had been recorded with the county registry 6 months prior. For 6 years, I had kept a secret that was about to turn their entire world upside down. To understand how a mother could throw her own child's belongings into garbage bags without a second thought, you have to understand the foundational dynamic of the Vance household. We were never a wealthy family, but for the first 12 years of my life we were stable. My father worked as a structural inspector for the county, a man of precise habits, quiet dignity, and an absolute devotion to paper records. He taught me how to read financial ledgers before I learned long division algebra. He would sit me at the kitchen table every Sunday evening, spreading out the household bills, showing me how to balance a ledger, audit expenses, and verify receipts. "Numbers don't have emotions, Leo," my father used to tell me, running his thumb over the edge of a yellow legal pad. "People will lie to save face, to obscure their mistakes, or to make themselves feel important. But a ledger never lies. If you keep the receipts, you hold the truth." My brother Julian was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment he was born, my mother treated him not just as a son, but as an indelicate, priceless heirloom. While my father tried to instill discipline and financial literacy in both of us, my mother shielded Julian from every consequence. When Julian broke a neighbor's window with a baseball, my mother blamed the neighbor for putting their house too close to the lot. When Julian failed his middle school mathematics courses, my mother insisted the teachers were intimidated by his creative intellect. I became the anchor, while Julian became the sail. I was expected to earn straight top marks, clean the gutters, mow the lawn, and manage my own needs without causing a ripple of inconvenience. Julian was given an allowance for simply waking up on time. I took a job at a local hardware store at age 15, stocking lumber on weekend shifts from 5 in the morning, while Julian was bought a brand new mountain bike to help him find his passion. Then, when I was 17, my father passed away suddenly from a massive heart attack. The quiet stability of our home collapsed overnight. My mother was completely illiterate when it came to property taxes, legal contracts, or home maintenance. In her grief, she turned entirely to emotional performance, relying on family relatives to pity her while ignoring the mounting pile of debt left behind by incomplete insurance claims. Julian, who was 14 at the time, stepped seamlessly into the role of the tragic, spoiled prince. He demanded expensive clothes, gaming setups, and social trips to deal with his grief, and my mother willingly plunged us into credit card debt to appease him. I stepped into my father's shoes out of sheer survival instinct. While completing my final year of high school, I worked 30 hours a week at the lumber yard and took on night shifts at a local logistics warehouse. I didn't spend a single dime on myself. Every paycheck I earned was deposited into a joint account my father had set up for me when I turned 13, an account my mother had forgotten existed because it wasn't tied to her primary bank. I learned very quickly that my mother's financial recklessness was reaching a catastrophic threshold. 2 years after my father died, I overheard her sobbing on the phone to my Aunt Clara. The bank was preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings on our 3-bedroom suburban home. My father had taken out a second mortgage to cover medical expenses during his brief hospitalization, and my mother had simply stopped making the monthly payments, choosing instead to fund Julian's summer trips and sports equipment. They were 90 days away from losing the house entirely. I didn't scream at her. I didn't throw a scene. Instead, I remembered my father's core lesson: keep the receipts. Find the lever. I went to see Mr. Harrison, an attorney who had been a close friend of my father. Sitting in his wood-paneled office downtown, I laid out my bank statements, my wage slips from 2 jobs, and the original deed of the house which I had quietly pulled from my father's steel filing cabinet. I was 19 years old, attending a local community college on a full academic scholarship, working 50 hours a week, and holding over $40,000 in carefully invested savings from 6 years of relentless, uninterrupted labor. Mr. Harrison helped me execute a complex but entirely legal transaction. Because the estate was in probate and the mortgage was in default, I was able to privately purchase the mortgage debt directly from the secondary lender, effectively stepping into the shoes of the bank. Over the next 2 years, through a quiet private trust structure managed by Mr. Harrison's firm, I completely paid off the outstanding balance of the home, cleared the municipal tax liens my mother had ignored, and transferred the sole title deed into my own legal name. My mother never knew. She assumed that the sudden stoppage of foreclosure notices was the result of a clerical error, or a blessing from above that she had prayed for. She never asked who paid the taxes every November. She never asked why the county tax bills stopped arriving in her name, and began arriving addressed to Vance Property Holdings LLC. She simply continued living in the house, spending whatever small income she had on Julian, entirely oblivious to the fact that she was living under a roof owned 100% by her eldest son. I allowed her to stay, rent-free, because I believed in family duty. I maintained my small bedroom as my sole refuge, a modest room with my father's old wooden desk, my university textbooks, and my neatly ironed clothes. It was the only physical space in the world where I felt a sense of belonging. I worked 70 hours a week split between my finance degree coursework and my position as a junior risk analyst at an investment firm downtown. I paid for the property insurance, I paid for the roof repairs when a storm took off the shingles in March, and I paid for the plumbing upgrades. I asked for nothing in return. No gratitude, no praise, no special treatment. All I asked for was that my desk remain untouched, my books remain on their shelves, and my door remain locked when I was away at college. Now, fairness aside, I understand that life isn't a fairy tale where everyone gets the exact portion they deserve without asking for it. I know that parents often favor the child who screams the loudest, and that Julian's charm made him easy to indulge while my quiet self-sufficiency made me easy to ignore. I never expected my mother to throw me a parade for working 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. I didn't even care that Julian got a car for his 18th birthday, while I bought my own worn sedan with 8 years of savings. I accepted the unfairness as a baseline law of our household ecosystem, believing that as long as I kept my head down, managed my finances, and preserved my personal boundaries, we could all coexist under the same roof without tearing each other apart. But there is a vast, unbridgeable canyon between routine familial bias and outright total disrespect. The storm broke on a cool Friday afternoon in October. I had driven for hours from the university campus, exhausted after surviving a grueling week of midterm examinations and financial auditing projects. My body ached for sleep, and my mind was desperate for the quiet solitude of my room. I unlocked the front door of the house, holding a small duffel bag over my shoulder and a cardboard box of textbooks in my arms. The moment I stepped into the entryway, the familiar smell of lavender floor cleaner hit me, but something was profoundly wrong. The living room furniture had been rearranged. My father's old armchair, the one piece of furniture my mother had promised never to move, was gone, replaced by a cheap, velvet L-shaped sofa. Before I could process the change, I heard loud laughter coming from upstairs, followed by the heavy thud of heavy items being dragged across the hardwood floor. I set my box down on the hallway console table and walked quickly up the stairs. When I reached the upper landing, I saw 3 heavy black contractor garbage bags sitting right outside my bedroom door. The knot on one of the bags had slipped open, revealing my high school debate trophies, my father's framed engineering certificate, and my winter coats wedged tightly together. My bedroom door was wide open. Inside, Chloe was standing on a stool, hanging pastel curtains over the window where my minimal blinds used to be. Julian was sitting on my bed, my mattress, stripped of my sheets, using an electric drill to mount a massive 65-inch television onto the wall plaster. My mother was kneeling near the closet, sliding my remaining shoes into a plastic storage bin. "What is going on here?" I asked. My voice was low, controlled, but carrying an unmistakable tension. My mother stopped her work and stood up, brushing her hands against her apron. She didn't look startled, she looked annoyed that her workflow had been interrupted. "Oh, Leo. You're early," she said smoothly, as if she were commenting on the weather. "We weren't expecting you until later tonight." "Why are my things in trash bags on the landing, Mom?" I asked, stepping into the doorway. "Why is Julian drilling into my wall?" Julian stopped the drill, resting it on his knee, and looked at me with a lazy smirk. "It's not your wall anymore, bro, keep up." "Julian, shut up for a second," I said, turning my gaze back to my mother. "Mom, explain this to me right now." My mother sighed, crossing her arms over her chest in that defensive posture she always assumed whenever she was about to justify an indefensible choice. "Leo, don't start a scene the minute you walk through the door," she said sternly. "You know that Julian and Chloe got engaged 2 months ago. They've been trying to find an apartment in town, but rent prices are absurd right now. They need to save every penny for the wedding and a down payment on a real home. What does their apartment search have to do with my bedroom?" I demanded. "Chloe is moving in with us," my mother announced, pointing around the room with total authority. "Julian's old room is far too small for 2 people, it barely fits a twin bed and a closet. Your room is the master suite on this floor. It has the private bathroom and the walk-in closet. It makes the most sense for the couple to take this space." I took a deep breath, fighting down the surge of hot anger rising in my throat. "Mom, I live here. I come home every weekend to study. All my university materials, my father's documents, and my personal setup are in this room. You are at university 5 days a week," my mother snapped back, her voice rising to drown out my logic. "You're barely here. You sleep here maybe 8 nights a month. Why should a massive bedroom sit empty 80% of the time when your brother and his future wife are trying to start their lives?" "Because it is my room," I said, my voice hardening. "I have lived in this room for 15 years. If Julian and Chloe need a place to live, they can rent a place like everyone else, or they can take Julian's room and adjust." Chloe stepped down from the stool, tossing her hair over her shoulder, and looking at me with a localized mixture of pity and contempt. "Leo, honestly, don't be so selfish," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We're starting a family. You're just a student living in a dorm half the time. It's just a room. You don't get a vote in this, Chloe," I said coldly. "Don't you dare speak to her in that tone," my mother shouted, stepping directly between me and Chloe. "This is my house. I make the rules under this roof. I gave birth to you, I raised you in this house, and I decide who sleeps in which room. She needs it more than you, Leo. Chloe needs stability right now, and Julian needs to feel like a man establishing a household. And what about what I need, Mom? I asked, quieted down. What about my space? My boundaries? You are an adult man, Leo. Stop acting like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum over a bed, my mother declared, her index finger pointing inches from my face. Your things have been moved to the basement storage corner. We set up a folding cot for you down there near the laundry machine. You can sleep there when you decide to visit on weekends. If that isn't good enough for you, you can find a hotel or stay at your campus library. Julian chuckled under his breath, leaning back against my wall. Yeah, Leo. The cot's pretty comfortable. I checked it out earlier. Very rustic. I looked from my mother's hardened, unyielding eyes to Julian's smug face, and finally to Chloe, who was already turning back to hang her decorative curtains. They truly believed they had executed a perfect, unquestionable coup. They believed I had no recourse, no power, and no choice but to drag my trash bags down to a damp basement floor. They had completely forgotten who actually paid the bills. I did not scream. I did not hurl insult for insult, nor did I grab Julian's drill and throw it through the window. Instead, I backed out of the room, picked up my heavy cardboard box of textbooks, and carried it down the stairs to the main level. My mother followed me down, her footsteps echoing sharply on the wood treads. She wasn't satisfied with simply taking the room, she needed me to submit verbally. She needed me to accept the hierarchy she had constructed, where Julian was the priority heir, and I was the convenient extra. I hope you're going to be mature about this at dinner tonight, she said, leaning against the kitchen archway as I set my box down by the front entry door. Uncle Robert and Aunt Clara are coming over at 7 to celebrate Julian and Chloe's formal cohabitation announcement. I won't have you ruining the evening with a sour mood. Uncle Robert is coming? I asked, looking up. Yes, she replied proudly. He's bringing a bottle of champagne to toast the couple. And I expect you to act like a supportive brother. We are a family, Leo. Family supports each other when someone is building a future. Family supports each other, I repeated quietly, letting the words sit in the space between us. Yes, she said firmly. And right now, Julian is the one building a future. You're just getting a degree. Once you graduate and get a real corporate job, you can buy your own house. Until then, you adapt to what this family needs. I walked out to my car without saying another word. I opened the trunk of my sedan, unlocked my heavy leather briefcase, and pulled out the thick blue paper portfolio that had sat undisturbed for months. Inside were 3 key documents: the original mortgage payoff receipt from the master lender, the tax clearance certificate signed by the county treasurer, and the notarized title deed explicitly stating that property parcel 4402, commonly known as 114 Maplewood Drive, was owned in fee simple absolute by Vance Property Holdings LLC, a single-member entity owned entirely by me. I did not bring the folder inside immediately. I locked it back in the trunk. I needed to see how far they were willing to push this injustice before I delivered the final, undeniable reality. At 6:30, the house began filling with extended family. Uncle Robert, my mother's older brother, arrived first, carrying a cooler of beer and a box of expensive steaks. Aunt Clara followed, carrying side dishes and loud congratulations for Julian. Throughout our childhood, Uncle Robert had been the chief enabler of my mother's favoritism. He had lent Julian money for his first motorcycle, money that was never repaid, and had routinely criticized me for being too cold and too obsessed with money whenever I refused to let Julian borrow my work gear or personal electronics. I sat in the corner of the living room, sitting on a low wooden stool near the front closet, silent, watching the spectacle unfold. Julian was walking around the main floor like a king inspecting his domain. He had already taken my father's framed vintage fly fishing lures from the living room mantel and replaced them with a digital photo frame showcasing photos of him and Chloe on a beach holiday. So, Leo. Uncle Robert boomed, stepping into the living room with a heavy glass of whiskey in hand. He looked down at me with a patronizing grin. Sister tells me you had a little disagreement about the room situation upstairs. I looked at him calmly. Did she? Come on, son, Robert said, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a physical warning than an expression of affection. You're 22 years old. You're out at college most of the time. Julian is taking the next big step in life. Getting married, settling down. He needs the space to build a home. You can't be clutching onto your high school bedroom like a child holding onto a safety blanket. It's not about a safety blanket, Uncle Robert, I said smoothly. It's about basic respect and communication. That room holds all my schoolwork, my father's personal archives, and my private belongings. They threw my things into garbage bags while I was on the highway. My mother walked into the room carrying a platter of appetizers, her face immediately twisting into an expression of theatrical distress. "Oh please, Leo," she cried out, ensuring everyone in the room could hear her. "Don't frame it like we threw your things in the trash. We carefully packed your items so Chloe could move her furniture in. We even set up a wonderfully quiet sleeping space for you in the lower level." "The lower level is an unfinished basement with a concrete floor and a leaking pipe, Mom," I noted quietly. "It has a space heater." Julian chimed in from the kitchen bar, laughing as he popped a bottle of beer. "And the concrete builds character, bro. You're always talking about hard work and grinding, consider it a training camp." Aunt Clara chuckled, shaking her head. "Honestly, Leo, you always were so sensitive. Your brother is making major life moves. A good brother would be thrilled to give up a little comfort so his future sister-in-law feels welcome. You should be offering to help them paint the walls." "I paid for the paint on those walls 2 years ago," I said, looking directly at my mother. My mother's face flushed slightly, but she quickly covered it with a wave of her hand. "That was a minor house maintenance contribution from your summer job, Leo. Don't act like you built the house. I have paid 40 years of effort into this home. I raised both of you here after your father left us with nothing." That line hit the room like a physical weight. Left us with nothing. My father had worked himself into an early grave trying to keep a roof over our heads. He had left life insurance policy payouts that my mother had squandered within 18 months on terrible retail investments and lavish holidays for Julian. Hearing her rewrite history in front of the entire family was the exact moment my remaining hesitation evaporated. "Father didn't leave us with nothing, Mom," I said, my voice dropping an octave, completely free of anger, completely flat. "He left us with clear instructions on how to manage our responsibilities. Some of us followed them. Some of us didn't." "How dare you," my mother hissed, setting the platter down on the coffee table with a loud slam. "How dare you speak about your father like that to insult me? In my own house." "Your house?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Yes. My house," she yelled, stepping forward, her face red with artificial rage. "I am the head of this family. My name was on the legal papers with your father. I decide who lives here, who sleeps in which room, and who gets kicked out to the curb if they can't show basic respect to this family. If you don't like how I run my home, Leo, you can pick up your duffel bag and leave right now. Nobody is forcing you to stay here." Julian stepped up beside her, folding his arms. "You heard her, Leo. Respect the house rules, or hit the road. We don't need your toxic energy ruining our engagement dinner." Chloe nodded in agreement, taking a subtle sip from her wine glass. "We really just want a positive, loving environment here, Leo. If you're going to make this all about your ego, maybe it's better if you stay at a hotel." I looked around the room. I looked at my mother, breathing heavily, feeling triumphant because she believed she had successfully asserted her dominance in front of her relatives. I looked at Uncle Robert, who was nodding in approval of my mother's harsh words. I looked at Julian, who felt invincible under his mother's endless protection. They truly believed that ownership was a matter of volume. They believed that whoever yelled the loudest, played the victim most convincingly, and leveraged family pressure most aggressively was the one who held the power. "All right," I said quietly, standing up from the low wooden stool. "All right, what?" my mother snapped. Are you going to apologize and take your things to the basement? No, I said smoothly, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my car keys. I'm going to get something from my trunk. I think there's a small detail regarding the home's operational hierarchy that we've all overlooked. Oh, go ahead and bring your little college textbooks out. Julian snickered as I walked past him toward the front door. Maybe there's a chapter in there on how to be a supportive brother. I walked out to the driveway. The cool October evening air was crisp and clear. The street was quiet, lined with the modest suburban houses of neighbors I had known since childhood. I opened the trunk of my car, unlocked the leather briefcase, and pulled out the crisp blue paper portfolio. Inside the portfolio was not just the deed. I had also printed out 6 years of itemized receipts for the property tax payments totaling $18,000 across 4 years. Receipts for the structural foundation repairs completed after the spring floods. The paid-in-full master lien satisfaction letter from the county registrar's office. And the official occupancy lease agreement drafted by Mr. Harrison's law firm, which explicitly designated the occupancy rights of the residents. I held the folder under my arm and walked back inside. When I re-entered the living room, the atmosphere was thick with smug satisfaction. They thought I was coming back to deliver a dramatic, emotional speech about how hurt I was. They were prepared to laugh it off, offer me a fake reconciliation, and force me down to the basement cot. Back so soon? Uncle Robert said, leaning against the fireplace mantel. Look, Leo, just sit down, have a soda, tell your mother you're sorry for being territorial, and let's eat some steak. I didn't answer Uncle Robert. I walked straight to the center dining table, the table where my father used to sit with me every Sunday evening, and laid the thick blue portfolio down flat on the wooden surface. Mom, I said, looking her dead in the eye. Sit down. Don't you order me around in my own home, she shouted again, though a tiny flicker of uncertainty flashed in her eyes when she saw the official legal seal on the cover of the blue document. Sit down, Mom, I repeated. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use an aggressive tone. I used the exact, cold, undeniable tone of a senior auditor reading an irreparable compliance violation to a failing branch manager. Because if you don't sit down and read page 3 of this folder, the police are going to be arriving here in about 20 minutes to explain it to you. The room went dead silent. Julian broke the silence with an anxious, forced laugh. Police? What are you talking about, man? Have you completely lost your mind because you had to switch rooms? Julian, I said without looking at him. Shut your mouth and let your mother read. My mother hesitated. She looked at Uncle Robert, who frowned, clearly confused by my total lack of panic. She looked at the blue folder lying on the table like an unexploded ordnance. Slowly, reluctantly, she stepped forward, pulled out one of the wooden dining chairs and sat down. What is this nonsense, Leo? She muttered, though her fingers were trembling slightly as she reached out to flip open the cover page. That is the master real estate file for 114 Maplewood Drive, I said quietly. I leaned both hands on the edge of the table, looking down at the papers spread out before her. 4 years ago, after Dad died, you stopped paying the mortgage, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet living room. You stopped paying the county property taxes. You took the $30,000 life insurance payout that was meant to secure this house, and you spent it on Julian's high school trip to Europe, his custom sports gear, and 3 vacations to Florida. That was family money, my mother gasped, her eyes wide. I used that money to help my child heal from grief. You used that money to buy favor with the child who never demanded responsibility from you, I corrected her coldly. And in doing so, you defaulted on the secondary mortgage. The bank issued a formal notice of foreclosure in November of that year. Do you remember that notice, Mom? You threw it in the kitchen trash bin and cried in your bedroom for 3 days, while Uncle Robert told you to ignore the greedy banks. Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably on his feet, clearing his throat. Now wait just a minute, Leo. I'm not finished, Uncle Robert, I snapped softly, pointing a single finger at him without turning my head. You didn't step in to pay that mortgage. Aunt Clara didn't write a check. Julian didn't get a job stocking shelves at 5 in the morning to save the family home. I did. My mother was staring at page 2, the master deed transfer document. Her eyes were moving rapidly back and forth across the printed legal text. I went to Mr. Harrison, I continued, detailing the timeline with surgical precision. I presented my savings from 6 years of uninterrupted labor, money I earned working 30 to 50 hours a week, while maintaining a 4.0 grade average. I purchased the defaulted mortgage debt from the lender through a private equity arrangement. Over the next 24 months, every single cent I earned went into satisfying the lien. I reached over and flipped the document to page 3. On March 14th of last year, the master title was officially cleared and transferred. The sole owner of 114 Maplewood Drive, the land, the structure, the contents, and the parcel rights, is Vance Property Holdings LLC. And as the corporate registry documents on page 4 clearly state, I am the sole managing director and 100% equity shareholder of that company. My mother's face lost every single drop of color. The deep red flush of anger was replaced by a ghostly, pale shock. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. What does that mean? Chloe asked, her voice high-pitched and suddenly nervous, looking between Julian and my mother. Julian, what does that mean? Julian stepped up to the table, snatched the blue folder out of my mother's hands, and began frantically flipping through the pages. He wasn't trained in reading contracts, but even he could recognize the county recorder's official embossed gold seal on the title page, right above my signature. This is fake, Julian stammered, his confidence completely collapsing into stuttering panic. This is a fake paper. Mom owns this house. Dad built this house. Dad built his life on responsibility, Julian, I said, standing up to my full height. Something you have never experienced for a single second of your existence. This document is notarized, registered with the county clerk, and legally binding across every jurisdiction in this state. Mom does not own this house. She hasn't owned this house for over 18 months. She lives here because I allowed her to live here. She lives here rent-free because I chose to extend grace to a mother who never gave me a fraction of the same consideration. The silence in the room was absolute. The background hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded unnaturally loud. Uncle Robert stared at the document in Julian's hands, his mouth slightly open, completely stripped of his blustering authority. Aunt Clara quietly set down her dish of food on the side counter, backing away toward the wall, as if the table had become hazardous. My mother slowly raised her head, looking up at me as if she were seeing a complete stranger for the first time in her life. Leo. She whispered, her voice cracking violently. You bought the house. I saved the house, Mom, I corrected her firmly. If I had not executed that transaction 4 years ago, you, Julian, and all your furniture would have been tossed onto the sidewalk by the county sheriff before Julian even finished high school. I worked 80 hours a week between my studies and 2 jobs so that you would have a roof over your head. I paid the taxes every November so the county wouldn't put a tax lien on the property. I paid $7,000 out of my personal savings last spring to replace the master sewer line. Why didn't you tell us? Julian demanded, his voice cracking with rage and desperation. Why did you hide this from your own family? Because I knew exactly what would happen if I told you, I said, looking Julian straight in the eye. If you knew I owned this house, you and Mom would have demanded that I sign over half the equity to you. You would have used the property as collateral for another bad car loan, or another failed business idea. You would have treated my sacrifice as your birthright. I took a step closer to the table, taking back the blue folder from Julian's weak grip and laying it flat under my palm. I kept quiet because I wanted to maintain a peaceful family dynamic, I continued. I was content to let Mom pretend she was the head of the house. I was content to sleep in my modest room, keep my head down, finish my degree, and let you all live your lives without throwing your financial failure in your faces. I asked for exactly one thing in return for providing this family with a rent-free shelter, my privacy and my space. I pointed up toward the ceiling, directly toward my bedroom. And how did you reward that grace? I asked, my voice piercing through the room. The moment I stepped away to focus on my education, you broke into my room. You threw my father's memory into trash bags. You put my personal achievements in garbage sacks on the landing. And you handed my home, my property, over to a girl who has known this family for 3 months, while telling me that I belong on a folding cot in a damp basement. My mother suddenly burst into deep, loud sob, burying her face in her hands. Leo. Please. I didn't know. I didn't know you owned the house. I thought it was still the estate's money. You didn't care whose money it was, Mom. I said, rejecting her tears without hesitation. You didn't check. You never check. You just take and you give it all to Julian, because Julian is your favorite, and I am just the worker horse who is supposed to keep quiet and pay for everything. Uncle Robert stepped forward, raising his hands in a defensive gesture. Now, Leo, look, let's all calm down. This is a massive shock to everyone. Your mother made a mistake. She didn't have the full picture. But we're family. We can figure this out like adults. You don't need to be so aggressive. I am not being aggressive, Uncle Robert, I said, turning to him with absolute calm. I am being structural. When a building's foundation is rotten, you don't paint over the drywall and pretend it's strong. You inspect the ledger, identify the burden, and clear the hazard. What are you saying? Chloe asked, her voice trembling as she clutched Julian's arm. Where are we supposed to live? You're not living here, I said directly to Chloe. Leo, my mother screamed, looking up with tears streaming down her face. She is your brother's fiancée. They are getting married. Then your brother can do what adult men do when they get married, I replied coldly. He can sign a lease, pay a security deposit, and earn the roof over his head. He will not start his married life by stealing my room in the house that I paid for. Julian's face twisted into an ugly, aggressive mask. He stepped forward, putting his chest out, trying to physically intimidate me just like he used to do when we were teenagers. You can't do this, Leo. Julian shouted. You can't just kick us out. Mom lives here. This is her home. You can't just come in here with some legal trick paper and push us around. It's not a legal trick paper, Julian, I said softly. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a second document, a set of crisp, white sheets with pre-printed legal red lines down the margin. This is an official notice to quit and demand for possession, prepared by Mr. Harrison's law firm 3 months ago when I first noticed Mom missing tax notifications. I laid the white document down right next to the blue folder. As the legal owner of this property, I am revoking the informal, unwritten tenant-at-will status of everyone residing in this house, I announced. My mother gasped, dropping her hands from her face in absolute terror. Leo. No. You can't evict your own mother. I am not evicting you today, Mom, I said, looking down at her with a mixture of profound sadness and absolute finality. I am establishing the new rules of occupancy. And those rules start right now. I turned back toward the stairs, looking at the 3 contractor garbage bags sitting on the upper landing. Here is what is going to happen in the next 60 minutes, I said, my voice cutting through the tension of the room like a broadsword. First, Julian, you and Chloe are going up to that master bedroom right now. You are going to take down those pastel curtains. You are going to unmount that television set from my wall. You are going to patch the drill holes you made in the plaster. And you are going to pack every single item of Chloe's belongings back into her car. And if I say no? Julian sneered, trying to hold on to his last thread of bravado. What if I just stand right here and tell you to go to hell? If you say no, I replied without a second of hesitation, pulling my phone from my pocket and tapping the screen. I hit dial on this preconfigured number. It connects directly to the local police precinct dispatcher. I state that 2 unauthorized individuals, Julian Vance and Chloe Bennett, are trespassing on private corporate property owned by Vance Property Holdings LLC, and that they are currently damaging the interior structure without the owner's consent. I have the deed, I have the corporate registration, and I have the title right here on the table. The officers will be here in 8 minutes. They will escort you off the property in handcuffs, and I will press formal criminal property damage charges against both of you before midnight. Chloe gasped, turning to Julian with total panic in her eyes. Julian. Do something. He's serious. I can't have a criminal record. I work in corporate accounting. Then I suggest you start carrying your boxes down the stairs right now, Chloe, I said, looking at her with cold indifference. Julian looked at me, looking for any sign of a bluff, any crack in my posture, any hint of emotional hesitation. He found absolute zero. For the first time in his 22 years of life, he realized that his mother's emotional shield could not protect him from the concrete reality of legal ownership. Move, I said quietly. Julian swallowed hard, his face turning bright red with pure humiliation. He grabbed Chloe by the wrist and marched up the stairs, his footsteps heavy with defeat. Seconds later, the frantic sound of packing, unmounting hardware, and rustling bags echoed down the stairwell. I turned my attention to Uncle Robert and Aunt Clara. Uncle Robert, Aunt Clara, I said, gesturing toward the front entry door. The family celebration is officially cancelled. You can take your steaks and your champagne and leave. Leo, son, you're making a terrible emotional mistake, Uncle Robert tried to say, though his voice had lost all its booming confidence. Family doesn't treat family with legal documents and police threats. This is going to destroy your relationship with your mother forever. My mother destroyed our relationship the moment she decided my years of sacrifice were worth less than Julian's comfort, I replied firmly. You enabled her bad decisions for a decade, Robert. You never offered $1 to save this house, but you were more than happy to sit at this table, drink my whiskey, and lecture me on how to be a good son. Out. Now. Uncle Robert opened his mouth to argue, but Aunt Clara grabbed his arm, shaking her head. They picked up their coat and their cooler, moving quickly past me toward the door. As Robert passed, he couldn't even look me in the eye. The door clicked shut behind them. Now, it was just me and my mother in the silent living room. She was sitting at the dining table, her shoulders slumped, staring at the notarized deed with tears silently dripping onto the polished wood surface. The grand illusion of her absolute authority had completely shattered into pieces. Leo. She sobbed, looking up at me with raw, broken eyes. What are you going to do to me? Are you going to throw your own mother out onto the street? I walked over to the table and pulled out the chair across from her, sitting down. I looked at her across the wooden surface where my father used to teach me balance sheets. I am not going to throw you out on the street, Mom, I said softly. I am not Julian. I do not act out of spite, impulse, or cruelty. She let out a long breath of relief, but I immediately held up a hand to stop her. However, I continued, the era of free living and unearned favoritism is officially over. I pulled out a third paper from my folder, a standard formal lease agreement. Starting next month, you will pay a nominal, formal rent of $600 a month to Vance Property Holdings LLC, I declared. That money will go directly into an escrow account designated for property taxes, insurance, and long-term maintenance of this house. You will receive a legal tenant contract that guarantees your right to live in the smaller bedroom downstairs for the rest of your natural life, provided you adhere to the property terms. The smaller room, she asked, her voice trembling. Yes, I replied flatly. The master bedroom, my room, will be locked. It will remain my private residence whenever I am home from university or work. You will not touch it. You will not enter it. You will not allow Julian or Chloe to set foot inside it. And what about Julian? She whispered, terrified of the answer. Julian is 22 years old, I said, standing up. He is an able-bodied adult. He has until 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon to pack every single item he owns and remove himself from this house. He is no longer permitted to reside here. If he wants a home for himself and his fiancée, he can work 80 hours a week and earn it, just like I did. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in quiet, total structural restructuring. By midnight on Friday night, Chloe's car was fully packed with her belongings, including her pastel curtains and her table lamps. She left the house without saying a single word to anyone, driving away into the night in tears. Julian spent the night sleeping on the living room sofa, the very sofa my mother had bought with money she didn't have. On Saturday morning, Mr. Harrison sent a legal representative from his firm to oversee the formal signing of the tenancy documents. My mother signed the lease agreement with a shaky hand, accepting her new role as a tenant in the house she once claimed to own. Julian tried one last time to rally support from the extended family. Throughout Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with calls and text messages from cousins, aunts, and family friends accusing me of being heartless, a tyrant, and a terrible brother. I didn't argue with any of them. I didn't get into text message wars or broadcast my feelings on social media. I simply opened a group chat, added every single relative who had sent me a guilt-tripping message, and uploaded 3 high-resolution files: the county tax foreclosure notice from 4 years prior, the master bank mortgage payoff receipt carrying my legal signature and company name, the itemized ledger showing that I had paid over $65,000 of personal earnings to keep the house from being auctioned off. Along with the files, I sent one short, clear message: the house was 90 days from public auction 4 years ago. None of you offered a single dollar to save it. I paid off the debt, paid the taxes, and maintained the roof with my own labor while working 2 jobs at 19. If any of you feel that Julian is being treated unfairly, you are more than welcome to co-sign a lease for him or open your own homes to take him in. Otherwise, your opinions on my private property are completely irrelevant. The group chat went dead quiet. Within 10 minutes, 4 relatives left the group. Not a single person offered to take Julian into their home or co-sign a lease for him. Their performative outrage vanished the moment concrete financial responsibility was requested of them. At 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, Julian loaded the last of his cardboard boxes into his worn sedan. He stood on the front driveway, holding his duffel bag, looking back at the house he had treated as his personal playground for his entire life. I stepped out onto the front porch, holding my hands in my pockets. Julian walked up to the base of the porch steps. The arrogant smirk that he had carried for 22 years was completely gone, replaced by a sullen, bitter defeat. "You really ruined everything, Leo," he muttered, looking down at the concrete. "You destroyed this family." "I didn't destroy anything, Julian," I said calmly. "I simply stopped supporting an illusion. You spent your whole life believing that the world owes you a living because Mom told you that you were special. Now you get to find out what the real world costs per square foot." He glared at me, turned on his heel, got into his car, and drove away. Over the next 6 months, the dynamics of our home shifted completely. My mother, stripped of her ability to use financial favoritism as emotional leverage, began to change. For the first time in her life, she paid her monthly rent on time. She kept the living room clean, she respected my privacy, and when I came home from university on weekends, my room was exactly as I had left it, locked, quiet, clean, and untouched. Julian and Chloe's engagement collapsed under the weight of real-world pressure 4 months later. Without a free master suite to live in, and without my mother's financial safety net, they were forced to rent a tiny 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. The stress of actual bills, rent payments, and mutual financial accountability quickly broke their relationship apart. Julian moved into a shared apartment with 2 college roommates and took an entry-level job at a local tire center, the first real, full-time job of his life. I graduated from university top of my class with a degree in finance and economics. 2 weeks after graduation, I accepted a high-paying role as a senior financial analyst at a national firm downtown. I still own 114 Maplewood Drive. The property has appreciated significantly in value, representing a solid foundational asset in my growing personal portfolio. But more importantly, it stands as an enduring monument to a simple truth that my father taught me years ago on a yellow legal pad. Favoritism, loud demands, and emotional manipulation can run a household for a season, but they cannot stand against the unyielding reality of concrete facts, clear boundaries, and documented truth. When people believe they can walk all over your quiet sacrifices, you don't need to raise your voice or lose your dignity. You simply need to keep your head down, build your foundation quietly, preserve your receipts, and let the truth speak for itself when the time comes. Because in the end, authority isn't held by the person who demands the room, it is held by the person who owns the deed. If you found this story compelling and it reminded you of the importance of protecting your boundaries and standing firm in your truth, please take a moment to hit the like button, leave a comment down below sharing your thoughts on how this situation was handled, and subscribe to the channel for more legacy true and life reckonings.